Well, hello, everyone. This is Dr. Shelley Plumb. I'd like to welcome you all back to this edition of PlumbTalk Radio. I am here today with an amazing author. I am here today with Kari Kampakis. How are you, Kari?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. And for all our listeners out there who are not familiar with Kari's work, she is an amazing writer and has written a book that I found particularly intriguing, and it's called Liked. Whose approval are you looking for? And Kari, I must know, with that book, tell our readers a little bit about what that book is about and what prompted you to write it.
Okay. Well, it's written for teen and tween girls, but it's really relevant to all ages. And what prompted me to write it was my first book came out 2 years ago, and it was called 10 Ultimate Truths Girls Should Know. And it was really as I started traveling to promote that book and talk about the messages in that book that I started seeing what were the biggest, issues in the world of teen girls today. I felt like everywhere I went, the moms were wanting me to talk about social media. They were feeling a little bit lost because a lot of them aren't on social media all that much. They weren't sure how to guide their daughters. And then all their daughters were talking about friendships. I felt like a lot of their questions all boiled down to relationships and issues they were having with other girls and how their friendships were changing now that social media was such a big part of their lives. So I knew as we started talking about a second book that I wanted to explore those themes of social media and friendship. And then, also as I started exploring those areas, I realized that identity plays a big role in that, how we see ourselves. Really plays a big role in our relationships and how we relate to other people. So really, that's how it came about. We came up with this title, Liked. We knew we wanted to be heavily focused on social media, but also what affects our choices on social media, which goes back to identity, faith, and friendship. So those are really how we came up with those topics.
That brings up a really wonderful point, and I know that in the book you really touch on identity, and you talk about cultivating a true identity. Can you describe for our listeners what you mean by that?
Yes. I think a true identity is an identity that nobody can take away from you. It's an identity that's built on a rock and not quicksand, as I like to put it when I'm talking to the teen girls. So when we build our identity on things like our appearance, being very beautiful, that's fine, but what happens when something happens when you don't look the way that you did, 2 years ago or 10 years ago? When you build your identity on something like your fashion choices, your wardrobe, what happens if your father loses his job and all of a sudden you don't have the funds to buy the kind of clothes that you used to? Those are things that can all change overnight. Those are earthly trappings. I think we also tend to build our identity on our talents, our achievements, the things that people tend to applaud us for. But what happens when I like to use the example of a dancer, somebody who's a great dancer, and everybody knows her as being a great dancer, but then one day she breaks her leg and she's out for 2 months or for a year. What happens to your identity then when you no longer can dance? So I just believe that true identity is built in our status as a child of God, and that by finding our identity there and just resting in our identity in Christ, which is basically just being the person that God created us to be, and that inner part of us that nobody can take away, that's not going to change no matter what happens to our life circumstances, that gives us a rock to build our confidence on, and that can help us build an identity that won't fluctuate from day to day and that we can always rely on and count on, and we can base our self-worth on that because our self-esteem won't go up and down based on how we're performing or what we're looking like on a certain day, but rather who we are inside.
Right. That's interesting because you're talking, and when I'm a writer as well, and when I write, a lot of times I'll write in metaphors, and you're talking, what I'm thinking about, I'll share it with you. I'm thinking about a cake. Isn't that funny? And with our looks, our achievements, those things that people applaud us for, that's almost like icing on the cake. What we really, and from what I'm hearing from you, we really need to focus on the actual cake part, which is our foundation, right? And that is something that no one can take away from us. And what makes up, I'm curious, as the author of this book, what makes up your personal foundation?
Well, a lot of these things that I talk about in my book are lessons that I learned the hard way. So, as far as Yes, I felt like I was the fourth of 5 children, and I was the shy child of my family. So I learned pretty early on that my way of standing out, my way of kind of building a name for myself was achievement. I was a hard worker, so I was willing to put in the work. So I just started, I built my identity on achievements, and it was fine all through school, getting good grades and awards, and then I got a great job out of college. So again, I was getting promotions and had my identity based on that, what I was doing. And it was when I got married and I moved to a new city. I had no friends. I had a new name, and I was like, who is this Kari Kampakis? I don't, I had nothing to attach to my name. And I felt terrible about myself. And that's when I realized, all of my achievements, none of that mattered anymore. Nobody cared that I'd gotten good grades in school or that I had this great job last year. In this new world that I was in, I felt like I was a nobody. And that's when I realized that I'd been building my identity on all the wrong things, on this quicksand. So that was probably the first seed that was planted on, finding my identity, my self-worth, and those things that don't change overnight. And it really wasn't until later on, probably my 40s, as I started writing these books and really digging deeper into my faith, that I realized why we're called to find our identity in Christ, and why that's the only safe place to put our faith, is because everything else can change in our lives. And so for me, that's what I try to find my identity in, is just knowing that regardless of how I feel about myself or what I think of myself or what anyone else is thinking about me, I still have immeasurable worth and value simply as a child of God, and so does everyone else.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I know that in your book, too, you touch, with regards to identity, you touch on social media, which is a really necessary topic to talk about in today's day and age. Can you describe for our listeners the connection between identity, like as opposed to what we were talking about just before, and social media?
Yes. Well, I think it's easy for all of us of all ages to build our identity based on what people are saying about us or thinking of us on social media. And I think the danger for our girls, for the teenagers that are on there, is that, in your teenage years is really where your identity is starting to form. And so I think what's very tempting for them is to base their identity on the number of likes they're getting or what people are saying about them, which, if things are going well, I guess that would not be a problem. But what happens when the next, somebody does make a mean comment, or when their post doesn't get a lot of likes? It's very easy for somebody that age to think that they have no worth because nobody's liking their post or nobody's paying them much attention. So I think that's the danger. And one thing I really try to emphasize to the girls when I'm writing to them or speaking to them in groups is just emphasizing that, social media is supposed to be fun. It's an extra, it's the icing on the cake, as you said earlier. It's an extra way to connect with people. It makes it convenient. You can keep up with your friends outside of school. It's fun to post pictures and share that part of your life. But it shouldn't be, it's not the telltale sign of who you are. And it definitely is not, it's not the gauge of what you're worth. And so I think we have to just take it with a grain of salt and just know that, as a blogger, I know this. I mean, you can have everybody loving your post one day and then your next post the next day not getting much response. The internet can be very fickle, and online friendships are very fickle. And I think we live in a world where we've watered down the idea of friends, and we can think that, we have all these friends because we have all these followers online. But I like to make the point that there's a difference between a person who will take 2 seconds to like your latest post and a person who will take off the entire afternoon to show up on your doorstep when you're facing an emergency. That's a true friend. And, we have a lot of acquaintances in life, but I think, true friends, that if you can count your true friends on one hand, then you're lucky, because our true core group of friends will never be a huge group of people. It's usually a smaller group. But on social media, we can be led to believe that we have all these friends, when in reality they may be more acquaintance-type friends, but not the friends who will show up on your doorstep.
Right. Well, can I ask you a question? This kind of dives into my personal relationships with my children. I have 3 children, and my youngest, I'll share with you and share with all the listeners out there, he had a particularly bad day at school 2 weeks ago, and he came home. He was bullied by another child, and he came home and wanted to jump immediately, not necessarily into social media like Facebook, but onto the online gaming. You're familiar with that, where they get online and they interact. And I limit that time for obvious reasons, but he was so distraught that day that I was limiting his time because he told me that online that was his true friends because of what had happened at school. So my question is when you're talking to these teenage girls, how do you help them differentiate between the true friends, like you said, that show up and will give an afternoon to help you out versus those that are online that you potentially are never going to see?
Right, and I think you raise a good point, and I think relationships can definitely be initiated online. I think they can be cultivated online. I mean, I know a lot of people that I have because of social media. I feel closer to them because I just know more of what's going on in their lives, and I'm not physically seeing them. But I think one thing that's important for our kids to understand is that, you know, how do you feel when you're with a friend in person versus when you're with a friend online? And there's really no comparison, I think, once you kind of start to think about it. So, you know, say you're with your friend in person. How does it feel when you are able to look into their eyes and laugh with them and just, you know, share eye contact and just really engage with them personally versus online where those things are not possible? And I think for our kids, it's hard to understand because they don't know both worlds like we do. You know, we have been in both worlds. We're one of the last generations that has been in both worlds.
True,
we know the difference. Yeah, and I think about, I have a 16-year-old niece, and I remember her telling her mom on her birthday that she got all these text messages, she got tons of phone calls, she got lots of text messages, she had lots of Instagram posts, people telling her happy birthday, but only one person called her, and it was a friend of hers from camp, and she told her mom that night that, you know, wow, that really meant a lot to me. And there was something in her that was triggered by that phone call. She knew that it just felt a little different, and then she knew that it took a little bit more effort than these other things that people had done. So I thought that was a good lesson for her, and it was a good reminder for me that sometimes I don't think they realize, because so much of their world is online, that they forget the value of those personal interactions.
You know, and that actually brings up a good question. When you're really focused on online and your identity being online, how does that correlate to a feeling of being accepted and loved?
When you're really basing it on what's happening online? Yes. Well, I like to say in one of my books, I think it's the first book, I say that, you know, as far as if you're putting all your eggs in that basket, you know, the thing about the internet, like I said, is it can be very fickle. And there's not a lot of loyalty, I feel like, in those relationships on the internet. And so you can be the darling of the internet one day and the laughing stock of the internet the next day. And so I've realized this even as a blogger, that, you know, I can't base my worth on how well my posts do, because I might have a post that goes viral and does great, and then the next post, which I think is even more of an important message than that one, doesn't take off like that does. And if I'm basing my self-esteem and my worth on what's happening, it's just I'm putting myself at the mercy of not only other people's opinions, but I think other people's moods and whatever's going on in their life. And as far as, you know, online interaction, I've come to realize that people bring their baggage into their social media habits. And, you know, when people, there's so much meanness and cruelty and just snappiness online these days, and sometimes I just try to sit back and think, you know, that's coming from a place of anger or hurt, that I think people, you know, it's so easy for us to take it personally if somebody makes a jab or a mean comment online, but I think so many times it's just that person's hurting and they are looking for a place to dump that hurt or a place to dump that anger. So it's very dangerous, you know, for us to be looking at those forums and letting that determine how we feel about ourselves.
Absolutely, because, I mean, how much easier is it to hide behind the keyboard and type something that's not appropriate, as opposed to looking into somebody's eyes and seeing that you hurt them? It definitely, that's a good point to make, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And here's something else that's interesting to think about. I had a pediatrician friend, and we were talking a few years ago about bullying. I think I was writing an article, and he said something that I thought was very interesting. He said, you know, bullying has changed in recent years. He said bullying used to be from the top down, you know, the big guy picking on the little guy. It's like a lot of times now it's from the bottom up. And I think social media gives a forum for people to do that. You know, it doesn't matter where you are. It could be, so I guess what that goes to show is it doesn't matter how successful you are, how accomplished you are, how well you're doing things. Even if you're doing everything right, there's going to be somebody out there who's looking to criticize you, who wants to bring you down. And social media, unfortunately, provides a forum to do that.
Yes, no, that's very true. And I think it goes back to what you were talking about earlier is, and at least that's how we run our company as well. You're absolutely right. You can put a blog post out one day that does fabulous, and then the next day you get some criticism, for example. And we personally take comfort in knowing we put each post out, knowing that it comes from a place of love. We want to make a difference. So, and actually, that's a good point. I did see something online that I would love your comment on. It actually came from the description of your book. And you say something to the effect, and forgive me if I'm not quoting it exactly, but you encourage your readers to make an eternal difference and not a temporary splash. What do you mean by that, Kari?
Well, I just think, and I'm the queen of being guilty of this. I think so much of what we pour our time and energy into are things that make a temporary splash. And so, as a mom, I think you realize as an adult, you realize how limited your time is, how you only have so much energy to give to things each day, and you start to prioritize, how am I going to spend my time each day? And so I try to think about, is this making a temporary splash or an eternal impact? And the way I try to explain this to girls is that, God cares more about, if you're affecting someone's faith or helping someone feel better about their day or lifting their spirits or turning their day around, if you help just one person, if you post something out there that really helps one person, that helps them maybe grow a little bit closer to God, helps them get maybe one step closer to heaven, does some of that big work, makes a big difference in somebody's life, that means more to God than getting 50,000 likes on your spring break picture. So I think something like getting a lot of likes on social media is great, but it makes a temporary splash. And I've learned this, like I said, through blogging. A lot of the lessons I put into this book are things that I've learned from blogging for several years. I remember when my first blog post went viral. I was on cloud nine for weeks. I just thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And it was so fun, and it is still fun when that happens. But what you realize is that high lasts for a few weeks, and then after a few weeks it dies down and everybody's on to the next viral blog post. So then you feel that pressure, I've got to go do it again. And so you can keep yourself in this rat race of just trying to, keep getting these highs. But I think when you live your life just chasing the likes or chasing the wrong things, like I said, it might bring temporary satisfaction, but it will not bring that long-term joy. So as far as making an eternal difference in someone's life, I think we just have to redefine what our idea of success is and just know, if we really are touching someone's soul or helping their faith or helping them in some deep, powerful way, that means more, and that is more of a contribution in this world than, posting a really pretty picture and getting a lot of likes on it. I have a priest friend who reads my books, and one thing he said that I thought was very interesting, he said when he was in seminary, they would tell the priest, if you help just one person get to heaven in your career, then you've been successful. And I just kept thinking after he said that, this is a priest they're talking about. They might be doing this for 40 years. This is their career. And if that's true for a priest, if they help just one person get to heaven, then they've been successful. Then what does that mean for us, who that's not our vocation? But, if we are helping someone, grow into the person that they're meant to be, grow in faith, then that can make a profound difference in their life.
Wonderful. I think that's good words to live by is for all of us. It doesn't matter what age you are or your circumstances, to strive to make that eternal difference as opposed to the splash. I think that's just wonderful. So in concluding the interview, Kari, I always like to ask, the people that we're speaking with, if you could leave our listeners with any tips with regards to, say it's a teenager that's listening to this, or even an adult or a parent, what tips would you leave them with regards to identity and making that eternal difference?
I think that the last point in my first book is, learning to tune into that inner voice over the megaphone of public opinion. I think that's probably the most important thing, is that Look at a child. I think a child does not have a problem being who they are. They don't mind being different than other people. There's so much diversity in an elementary school because the kids don't know how to be anything but themselves. And I think as we get older, and I see this because I live near junior high, and I'm always like, what happens to these kids from elementary school to junior high? Because all of a sudden in middle school, they start wanting to conform, and they're all dressing exactly like everybody else, and they're scared to do the math team when all their friends are doing dance team or cheerleading. They don't want to be different. And so, it's really what makes us different is what makes us great. And so, to remember that all of us are called to live authentically, not identically to everyone else, and to really just trust those internal urges and that voice of God inside us that's trying to guide us to keep us on the path that he created us for. And I really do believe that, you and I, we were created to serve our generation like no one in the universe has ever served before. And I know a lot of parents who don't like social media, and they wish they could just do away with it. And I understand the downfall of it, but I also tell them that there is some upside to social media, and if we can teach our kids to use it wisely, our kids were made for the digital age. I mean, God created them for this point in time, for the digital age. So what could be their purpose? How could we help them use it wisely so that they can help other people? And I think sometimes we just get off track in life when we try to be someone that other people are wanting us to be or someone that other people are forcing us to be, and we just lose sight of who we really are inside and who we were created to be.
Absolutely. Definitely. Wonderful, wonderful point. So, you know what, Kari, on behalf of the entire PlumbTalk team here, we just want to thank you very much for joining us on this call. I know that our listeners out there that are listening to this right now definitely have some really key points to go into their day and to make that difference we talked about.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Well, thank you, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. You too.
All right. And for all you listeners out there that are listening to this wonderful, wonderful call, we will be back shortly, and we will have another podcast for you to tune into. Thank you.